Four candidates, one stage in prime time, where they stand on the big issues you care about and what you need to know before you cast your vote. Next.
From 2 News, this is a Campaign 2020 primetime Utah Republican gubernatorial debate.
Thanks for joining us for the primetime gubernatorial debate right here on KUTV. I'm Heidi Hatch and joined by our former longtime political reporter, Rod Decker.
For the first time, Utah has 4 candidates in a Republican gubernatorial primary. Tonight's debate will be divided into 2 parts. In the first, each candidate individually will answer questions from Ms. Hatch and myself. In the second part, all of them will be together and they'll argue over issues in the campaign.
Tonight, Spencer Cox, Greg Hughes, and Thomas Wright are with us right here in the Black Box Theater in the Eccles Center. Jon Huntsman, who recently tested positive for COVID-19 at a remote location. Earlier today, we drew to see who would go first. That was Thomas Wright, so we will start with him and the first one-on-one. Thomas Wright is a real estate broker and former state GOP chairman. He is the president of Summit Sotheby's International Realty, based in Park City. He started that company in 2008. Wright grew up here in Utah and graduated from the University of Utah with a dual Bachelor of Arts degree in Russian and marketing. He served in several roles in the Republican Party, including the Salt Lake County Republican chairman and Utah Republican Party chairman from 2011 to 13. He's also represented Utah on the Republican National Committee. Wright has a history of involvement with many community organizations like the Utah Debate Commission, Utah Symphony and Opera, United Way of Salt Lake, and the Utah State Board of Regents. Wright is the son of Bob Wright, a state GOP chairman and prominent attorney who also ran for governor in 1980. He and his wife Caroline live in Salt Lake City with their 4 children. He enjoys being with his family, golfing, and fishing. Wright's running mate is Congressman Rob Bishop.
Good evening. We're here with Republican candidate for governor Thomas Wright. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. It's good to see you both.
Not so long ago, you went to see Governor Gary Herbert, and it is reported that he said to you, get out of the race, you don't have much chance, throw your support to Spencer Cox, your chance may come later. Is that essentially true? Can you tell us about that conversation?
I've been friends with Governor Herbert for about 15 years. I was the Salt Lake County Republican Party chairman, the Utah Republican Party chairman, and that gave me the opportunity to work closely with the governor. I told him last July he was backing the wrong candidate for governor, but he didn't believe me. And we agreed then that we would just agree to disagree on the race, and I told him that I had an inclination to get in. So in January when I got in the race, I told him, I said, hey, Governor, I'm getting in. I know you're supporting someone else, and let's just talk about other things other than politics and the governor's race. And so when I went to meet with the governor at this reported meeting, it did happen. I did go and meet with him. I went to talk to my friend. I had no idea that we were going to be talking about the governor's race because we had made that agreement earlier. He did, talk about other alternatives and did want me to support Spencer Cox, but I'm in this race to win it. I have a message that's resonating with Utahns, and I quickly declined that invitation because I believe in my candidacy.
Do you remember, can you remember a quote of what he said to you?
This is a good chocolate banana milkshake.
You had chocolate banana milkshakes?
That's his favorite, not mine.
Okay. It's against Utah law to ask somebody to get out of a race on the promise that you'll help them later politically. In your opinion, did he break the law? Did he come close? Did he raise an ethical concern?
The conversation, as I said earlier, I want to be really candid and transparent, and I hate that this is what we're talking about, because I have so much to offer the state of Utah. My candidacy is so much more than this, and who I am as a person. I have so much political and business experience to help Utah get back on track. But the conversation was, hey, if you support another candidate, maybe his backers and supporters will remember it, and that might pay dividends down the road. And we talked about a variety of different races, and that's how I remember the conversation.
In your opinion, was that proper or improper?
I said that as governor, I would not have done that. If I were governor, I would not get involved in a Republican primary. I wouldn't put my finger on the scale. I wouldn't try to influence the outcome. So I wouldn't have done that, but the governor did decide to do that, so it's probably a better question for him. I wouldn't do that if I were governor.
Did he have a point? You were very lucky tonight. We had drawings as to who got first and second and so forth, and I hear you won them all. If the governor's race were a lottery, you'd be the next governor.
It's a sign, Rod. I'm telling you, it's a sign.
But,
don't believe the polls, Rod. You know better than anybody else not to believe the polls.
That's what I'm going to ask you about.
The influencers in this state.
But you won the lottery. You're losing in the polls. Are your hopes forlorn here?
Not at all. I've been the underdog my whole life. I'm the kid that said, you know what, you can't get that athletic scholarship. You can't make the team. They said, you know, when you start a business, you can't do it. We don't, you know, they don't need your service here. I've been the underdog my whole life. I wouldn't be comfortable in any other role. And Utahns love the underdog. They love my message. And they're quickly realizing that just because a name is familiar, it doesn't mean that they're the right choice. We need to make sure that we understand Utah will continue to do well because of its people and because of how hard we work. And we need a governor that will tackle its problems, but it's the people that make this state great, and I am not forlorn. I'm excited about this race, and we're going to see it through to the end.
So, Mr. Wright, let's talk a little bit about you. You've said in the past, if we continue to use the same people, we're going to experience the same problems. While you say that, you also chose a running mate in Rob Bishop, who's been in the political business since 1978. Does that water down your message when you pick someone who is what you're trying not to be?
No, and I'm glad you asked this question, because let's say I'm a bald candidate for governor, and I pick a candidate for lieutenant governor that has a full head of hair. Does that mean that I have a full head of hair? I don't think so. I think I'm still bald. So I am a newcomer. I've never held publicly elected office, and Congressman Bishop was a good running mate for me because he's been a school teacher for 28 years. I want to focus on improving our public education system. Who better to help do that than somebody that's been in the classroom for 28 years? And in addition to that, I'm sure we'll talk about the budget. We need somebody that understands the federal government entitlement programs. We need to start to wean ourselves off of all the money that we take from the federal government because it comes with so many strings. Congressman Bishop loves rural Utah. We need to focus on rural Utah. He's the perfect running mate. Doesn't water down my message at all. It makes me a stronger, better candidate.
I do want to talk a little bit about the growth issues our state faces right now. You run 14 offices for high-end real estate right now. I'm assuming people, no matter how much you're spending, it's tough to find a home right now. There's not enough out there. But right now we're also having a problem with affordable housing. Is there a way that we can solve this problem from the governor's office? Because people need somewhere to live to be successful in life.
Well, the problems that you focus on expand, and my experience as a real estate executive can help me solve the affordable housing crisis with local leaders. We need to make sure that we never overstep into local municipalities, tell them what to do, or tell them how to use local zoning ordinances, but we can inspire them. And as a real estate executive, I can use that business experience and business leadership to help tackle the affordable housing crisis. This is a problem that's been ongoing for a long time, Heidi. If we continue to elect the same people, we're not going to create a solution. We've seen what my three opponents will do, and we're in this position because of their leadership. It's time to have a new leader that understands the challenge, that will work with local government to help create the solution to affordable housing. And I've been specific about it. We need to overcome the not in my backyard mentality, and we need to be creative with how we use local zoning ordinances at the local level, always letting the people closest to the decision make that decision.
So how do you change that? Because most people, when you go to your city council meetings, you're there and showing up because you don't want that apartment complex in your backyard. You have a half an acre, you move to that area because of that. How do you work with that?
Well, you do it through being a leader. This is leadership. It's about inspiration. It's about aspiration. It's about saying, hey, I have some ideas. Let's look at this out of the box. Let's look at ideas that we've never thought of before. If we just sit and say, oh, well, this is a local government decision, there's not much I can do as governor, then we'll continue to have the problem. I want to go sit down with the local leaders. I'm so excited about it. Go sit with them and say, hey, here are 2 or 3 ideas that you may not be thinking of. And I've offered those specific solutions in this campaign, looking at big parking lots that are underutilized on main arteries and saying, could that land be rezoned with a variance to put higher density housing right there where people are living and working, and so that they can walk in their local communities, reduce congestion, and improve our air quality. So there's a lot of things we can do, but you have to focus on the problem in order to solve it. And as governor, I want to solve the affordable housing crisis because families that don't have housing see children with behavioral health challenges, their children don't do as well in school, and they just don't reach their potential. So this is much more than a housing problem. This is a human development challenge, and we can do better in the state of Utah.
On your website, you say, pay teachers more money for mental health, more for tax subsidies and infrastructure for the rural economy, and maybe more for affordable housing. Then you say, low taxes are #1. Maybe we should cut taxes. are you using politicians' math here? How can you cut taxes and spend more on all those things and balance the budget?
It's a great question, Rod. It's all about prioritization. You can tell a lot about a government by the way they spend their money. You can't do everything. I'm not promising the voters in this race that I can do everything. But what I can do is look at a $20 billion budget and say we don't have a revenue problem. We have a spending problem. And we need to spend our money according to our priorities. If public education really is our #1 priority in the state of Utah, and it is, we need to pay our teachers a fair wage and get out of their way. If affordable housing is important, we need to do that. Rod, I can tell you so many places in the state budget that I think we're spending money that aren't as important as those things that we just talked about.
Where are you going to cut? To spend's easy, cutting's hard. Do some cutting.
I'll give you a perfect example. I've been on the State Board of Regents that oversees higher education. Our 8 institutions of higher education are some of the best in the world. But inside of those universities, they all have their own HR department. They all have their own accounting department. There's a lot of redundancies. As a business person, I understand economies of scale. If you consolidate those services into one place, you'll save money. Now, I don't want to freak any of those employees out because I know that they have families. But there are ways to consolidate services in state government and to find efficiencies. State government's bloated, Rod. You know that.
How much are you going to squeeze out of higher ed?
It's not about squeezing.
It sounds like squeezing.
It's not about squeezing. It's about efficiency, and it's about getting more for your money.
How much you get efficiency out of higher ed?
I love it. I wish people could see your hand wringing. I hope they can on the stage. It's so visual, Rod. I love it. You know what? I believe you can do less with more. That's what I've done in the private sector. That's what I've done with my family. That's what Utahns do every day.
Can we get a number? Can we get a number?
A number of what?
Of how much you're going to efficiency out of higher ed.
I'm one guy. When I have the Governor's Office of Management and Budget, I'll have a lot more details for you.
Where else? Where else are you going to efficiency?
Well, the state government is the middleman in a lot of state programs, right? The way that we distribute the WPU in public education. We can distribute that more efficiently to the local level and let local school districts make those decisions. There's a lot of bureaucracy in state government, Rod. You know that. Because over time it grows, it gets bigger. We can do things more efficiently. We just need a business-minded person who wants to get in and make that happen.
Last I looked, we had fewer administrators per school kid than any other state. You can efficiency some out, but how much? Can you? I mean, you're talking quite a bit of money if you're going to raise teachers' salaries, et cetera.
Yeah, but you know what? Teachers are our priority, Rod. We spend all this money on public education, right? And when the highest-paying jobs are in administration, and teachers leave the classroom, our best teachers leave the classroom to go to administration, that isn't what we want. Teachers don't want to do that. I know so many teachers that have decided not to stay in the profession. And the reason they're not staying in the profession is they're not making a living wage. There can't be anything more important in a $20 billion budget in the state of Utah than paying our teachers fairly. It's not the only thing. I don't propose just throwing money at the problem, but we have to start there to solve our teacher shortage. And until we do that, we're not going to improve our public education outcomes, and our children deserve it.
So how do we get this money right now? Because normally we're looking at a budget where you have a certain amount of money for education, but right now we're looking at a shortfall where the governor is saying 2%, 5%, 10% that's going to have to come from every area. And if we're taking that away from education, how do you pay teachers more? How do you make sure the kids that are going to school are getting the education they deserve when we're talking about taking money away from ed right now?
Well, there's no question that this is a more difficult time to do it because of the economy, because of the budget shortfall. I acknowledge that. But my question for my 3 opponents is they had an economic run-up that was unprecedented in the state of Utah. And they didn't make it happen when we had budget surpluses. So you know they won't make it happen in times of economic uncertainty like this. Look, I'm not promising root beer in the drinking fountains. What I'm saying to you is that we will be more efficient with the state's resources, and we will look at every line item of the budget. We'll look at it for efficiency, and we'll ask ourselves the questions, how do we do this more effectively? It won't happen overnight, but if paying teachers is a priority, their money to do it is there. And I love on this campaign trail, every time I talk about these things, I hear from politicians that are elected, you know, he doesn't understand. That can't be done. We need to elect people that believe it can be done, that know how to make it happen because of the results that they've had in their business and professional life, and then elect them so that we can see change.
Are you, under any circumstances, are you going to raise taxes?
No.
Good.
And you know what? For the last 7 years, under, Lieutenant Governor Cox, we've raised taxes or fees every single year, and that was during an economic run-up. So we need a fiscal conservative in the governor's office, and Thomas Wright is that person.
All right, Thomas Wright, thank you so much for being with us. We are out of time with you. We're going to have a 60-second break, and we'll be right back with Mr. Jon Huntsman. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Amongst the stars, the Earth is but a speck of cosmic dust. But for us, it's home. Every smile, every tear, every infinite memory will be made here. Everyone who ever was or will be lived out their lives on that speck. That is home.
Spencer Cox is a proven leader and true conservative. A sixth-generation farmer, he was raised on Utah values of integrity, commitment, and hard work. He helped build one of the state's fastest-growing telecommunications companies, while also serving as a mayor, county commissioner, and state legislator. As lieutenant governor, he has led our state through remarkable prosperity and been a steady hand during challenging times. He is proven, principled, and he will always put Utah first.
Thanks to Garbett Homes for underwriting this 2 News debate. Let's go green together.
Jon Huntsman Jr. was most recently the U.S. ambassador to Russia. He is a former Utah governor who served from 2005 to 2009. He also served as the U.S. ambassador to China under the Obama administration from 2009 to 2011 before deciding to run as a Republican candidate for president in the 2012 election. Huntsman has also served as a U.S. trade ambassador and ambassador to China and Singapore. He began his political career as a staff assistant to President Ronald Reagan. Huntsman is the son of the late philanthropist Jon Huntsman Sr. He's worked in various capacities with the Huntsman Corporation and served on several boards. He attended the University of Utah and has a bachelor's degree in business from the University of Pennsylvania. He and his wife, Mary Kay, have 7 children and 8 grandchildren. Huntsman speaks fluent Mandarin Chinese and enjoys music and motorcycles. His running mate is current Provo Mayor Michelle Kafusi, the first woman to hold the office. We are joined now by former Utah Governor Jon Huntsman. He is not in the same room with us because of the pandemic. Jon Huntsman, you tested positive for COVID-19 last week, so you're sequestered in your own room all by yourself right now. Before we get started, how are you feeling tonight?
Well, thanks, Heidi. It's a little lonely here, quite frankly. I'd rather be with the rest of you all. I'm about 50% capacity, so if I say anything self-incriminating or terribly embarrassing tonight, then blame it on COVID and not me.
Before we move on with other questions, has your diagnosis and this time you've spent at home given you a different perspective as you move forward with how we're dealing with the pandemic?
It's given me, Heidi, many perspectives, not least of all thinking about a lot of other people who are in a less fortunate set of circumstances. The pressure and anxiety that are put on families who have to live under the same roof, the uncertainty about tests that take too long before you get the results, the sheer isolation away from everybody, the social distancing. You learn a lot about best practices and worst practices. But listen, this is not just a health issue. It's an economic issue because some people can't pick up the pieces and get back to work. But it's also a mental health issue. And that's something I think we have to be very mindful of because it isn't talked about a lot. The anxiety that is put on people, the stress that is put on people under the same roof, particularly those that may suffer from pre-existing conditions like my daughter Liddy, who's under our same roof. So we have learned a lot about this, and you pull out of it probably a little wiser, a little smarter to what's going on.
Governor Huntsman, you had the job. You were governor. You walked away. Why should people give you the job again?
That's a great question, Rod. Nobody will know what we went through when we were asked to serve in the most sensitive diplomatic spot in the world, China at the time. We'd been reelected. We'd carried every county in the state. We had record numbers. The economic reforms that we had put in place were pretty historic as well. And I'm sure Governor Leavitt and Governor Dern back in his day had to go through the same analysis about why you choose to take that call to duty. But I thought about my 2 sons who were serving active duty in the military, and I thought, they don't have the luxury of saying what party or who is my president. When asked, they salute and they try to do their best. And in a tradition in which I was raised, that's what I did. Some will never forgive you for that, and a lot will say they're proud of that kind of service. So as it relates to today, Rod, I feel that I've never been better prepared to bring more to the table. Our service is done. We are ready to do the important work in this state that in the years ahead I think will be transformational.
Back in 2007, when you were governor, you pushed through what I think's the biggest tax cuts ever happened in Utah. It didn't harm education then because we were flush. Since then, after that, we lost the money, and education was hurt and was poor in part because of those tax cuts. You say you're for education. Do you still put tax cuts first?
Well, some of the tax cuts and the tax reform generally, if you look at the weighted pupil unit back in 2007, 2008, was a record high if you adjust it for inflation. So tax cuts and delivering the first flat tax in the country, which we were able to do. I mean, nobody had seen anything like this before. It's still the same tax code we have today. Brought in investment and a huge awareness of Utah being on the map from an economic development standpoint. And I would argue that that is good longer term because it brings in the kind of economic activity that I'd like to return to by doubling our state's GDP. We sit at $180 billion today, and I see there's no reason why we can't take it to $500 billion. So if you want to talk about how we're going to double our spending for education, how we're going to pay for the kinds of mobility and transportation options we all want, there's no way to do it without doubling the state's GDP.
You were a proponent of vouchers, school vouchers, when you were governor before. That was defeated by the people. Are you still a proponent of school vouchers? You talk on your website of empowering parents. If you don't like vouchers, how are you going to empower parents? I think choice is a very powerful thing in education. I've raised 7 kids, and what I've concluded in public schools, private schools, we've homeschooled, as everybody is doing these days. We've done military academies and international schools, and I walk away from all those experiences thinking and understanding that all kids learn differently. They all approach the classroom with a different aptitude for learning, and they process differently. And that means we're going to have a lot of different options and choices for how we educate our kids. 90% of our kids are going to go to public schools, and they need to be the very best they can. But beyond that, we need some options. So, yes, I am a supporter. A supporter still of vouchers?
Yes.
And has this pandemic taught us anything? We've been all, I guess it's not even really homeschooling because we've had the support of teachers that are making those lessons and helping our kids at home. But is there anything that we can learn from this as we move forward, try to save money in the budget and make sure our kids get the best education where we can learn lessons from this last few months we've been in?
Let's take the very important lesson that my grandfather Huntsman used to teach me, who was an educator, and that is there's no higher calling in life than being an educator. And I think now after 4 months, parents probably have concluded that the appreciation we need to be showing for teachers should be off the charts high. So let's use this as an opportunity to do what we need to do to support teachers. So we have a high turnover rate, probably 2.5 times the national average. We need to make sure that we pay them properly, that we make sure that they are properly compensated, but it's not just compensation, it's appreciation as well. And it's making sure that they've got the training and the stream of professional options that will allow them to progress in their careers as well. So for me, I walk away, Heidi, thinking teachers are truly at the top of the pedestal of public servants, and we appreciate them today more than ever before. And we need to use this as a wake-up call for what we can do beyond what we have traditionally.
You just talked about how you've promised to double Utah's economy over a decade. When you were governor before, you took over in a recession and the economy went up, and then just before you left, there was a national recession and it went down pretty fast. Are you making a promise here that's dependent on factors beyond your control and you may not be able to keep?
Well, the Great Recession hit in probably 2000, and it ran its course through probably the second quarter of 2009, so I was around for a good part of it. What was important were the seeds planted. So the way that we took off from the Great Recession was very telling about the economic competitiveness. Tax code, regulatory environment, which is extremely important for business growth, the way that we had our tech training facilities aligned with business, and the way that we had rebranded our state Life Elevated. We're still Life Elevated, and I'd like to rebrand Crossroads of the World. We're the most brilliant population in the country. We've got so much to give. We've got so much to innovate and build and grow around. I want to go big. I want to make sure that this state is able to live up to its potential. And we can do that by doubling the state's GDP, and I have no doubt that we can do it in a way that's relatively recession-proof as well.
Can the governor's office do that when you're talking about doubling the GDP? Is this something that you can pick those winners and losers in, or is this something you leave to the free market and see what happens and what bubbles up?
I learned, Heidi, early on that capital is a coward. It will flee wherever it perceives there to be risk in the marketplace, and it will land in a safe haven. We have to make Utah the ultimate safe haven destination for capital. When capital comes, it will nurture ideas, it will spur entrepreneurship and innovation. And we can, government, it has a role to improve the overall competitiveness. So you've got taxes and regulation, both with the power to destroy. You want to make sure that you're using it with the power to grow and to provide opportunity. So I think there are three big industries that are going to be critical to the future of our nation, and I built a plan around them. They are defense, they are biotechnology and health sciences, and they are finance. And in all of these areas, they're all trillion-dollar industries. They all carry probably a 20% higher differential of compensation. So these aren't just jobs that we're creating. They're higher-paying jobs that will sustain us for decades to come.
As governor, you supported the federal, and as a candidate, you supported raising the federal minimum wage. Do you still support that? And besides talking about the feds, if you're governor, will you raise the state minimum wage?
Listen, I think we always ought to be working toward higher compensation for everybody. And I was in favor of it then, and I'm in favor of it now. The way you deliver is what is most important. You can deliver by making sure that the economy grows and is able to provide those higher wages, and that's my preferred route as we go forward. But I want to make sure that wages are always providing people with additional opportunities for growth and income.
Is this something that could be done when the new governor takes office, or is this a tough time to go to businesses and say, hey, we're going to raise the state's minimum wage when we have so many businesses that are just barely hanging on right now after the pandemic, some of them that haven't even opened their doors yet, where they're just trying to hang on, and when they do open, they're going to be treading water for quite a while?
I learned, Heidi, in the early days of Huntsman Corporation, I had a great dad who was a risk taker, and every time he saw darkness outside, it was light the next day. And when you're in your darkest point and there's despair, that's when you have opportunities. So in this moment of uncertainty globally, nationally, and in our state, I see huge opportunity for our state to grow and bring in additional opportunity and investment. In fact, there hasn't been a better time in probably 100 years to do what we want to do in doubling the state's GDP. And with that, real incomes will be impacted too. So needless to say, and this isn't COVID talking, Heidi, I'm a real optimist in terms of where we sit today and the opportunities for the right kind of governor to lead out on.
Do we really want twice the GDP? It'll mean more people, more pollution, more traffic, more trouble. Is that really what we want?
Well, Rod, I'd rather. So we're going to double our state's population by 2050 regardless. I'd much rather double our state's population if that's what's going to happen, and that's what the demographers are saying, and pay for it with a strong economy as opposed to just grow with the weak economy. So that's the choice we have. I think people are going to vote with their feet coming out of places like California and other states that aren't doing so well, and they're going to find a safe haven here. I think the numbers we're looking at in doubling by 2050 and adding another million over the next 10 years are probably low. I'm guessing we're going to see post-COVID a lot more people who decide that the quality of life here and the opportunities can't be beat. And I think we have to be smart enough to be prepared as the governor works with local government elected officials, because it's their jurisdiction in so many of these growth areas to really help lead out.
All right. Another million people, they say, in the next 10 years we're going to be sharing space with. Mr. Huntsman, thank you so much for sharing your time with us right now. We're going to have a short break and be back with Lieutenant Governor Spencer Cox next.
Thank you. The biggest mistake we can make right now is to think small. Today we have the highest unemployment on record, but I believe Utah has the opportunity to do great things. My economic plan will double Utah's economy over the next 10 years. That's how we fund education, manage our growth, and extend prosperity to every part of our state. Utah has long been known as the crossroads of the West. I believe we have a new destiny to become crossroads of the world. I'm Jon Huntsman, and I am asking for your vote.
Utah has had a one-party government for too long. Many of our leaders have lost touch with the public. Recently, Utahns have voted for Medicaid expansion, medical marijuana, and better political boundaries, only to have the legislature repeal those election results because they think they know more than we do. Now leaders are trying to raise taxes on food. That's the problem with a one-party government. It's time we have a governor who listens to voters.
I'm Chris Peterson. I endorse this message, and I ask for your vote on November 3rd.
Spencer Cox is Utah's current lieutenant governor. He grew up here in Utah, the oldest of 8 children in a farming family in Fairview. He attended Snow College and Utah State University. He got his law degree at Washington and Lee University of Law. Cox clerked for the U.S. District Judge Ted Stewart, then began his law career in Salt Lake City. Eventually, he and his high school sweetheart, Abby, felt the pull to head back to Sanpete County. He began working with his father, managing the Cox family telecommunications company, Centracom. Cox served as city councilman, mayor, and county commissioner there as well. He represented District 58 in Utah's House of Representatives until getting that call from Governor Gary Herbert in 2013 to be his lieutenant governor. He now makes the 4-hour round-trip drive from Fairview to Salt Lake City. Cox and his wife, Abby, have 4 children. He plays the bass and is a big Utah Jazz fan. His running mate is Utah Senator Deidre Henderson, who represents Utah's 7th District. Welcome back. We are now joined with our current Lieutenant Governor, Spencer Cox. And the question top of mind right now, you chair our state's COVID-19 task force, where we've had some major wins early on with low case counts. But we've also had some losses where we're looking at some of these no-bid contracts, a $6 million app that's still not contract tracing, and other issues as we go through this. This is the first time we've dealt with the pandemic. But if you're owning the wins in this, do you also have to own the losses we're taking right now?
Well, Heidi, thank you for the question. And Rod, welcome back. It's great to have you. And I just want to say to Ambassador Huntsman, we're glad he's well and able to be with us tonight. The answer is yes. Part of leadership is owning the good things and the bad things, learning from the mistakes that we make. I would love to have the ability to go back 3 months later and make those decisions all over again. That would be very easy, but we don't have that luxury. And I'm very proud of our state and the way that we handled this coronavirus crisis from the very beginning, and more specifically, the way Utahns stepped up to join the fight, to protect people, especially to protect the most vulnerable. We've done a tremendous job of this state. It hasn't been perfect, and we look back, we learn from our mistakes, and we move forward.
I want to talk a little bit about your involvement. You're heading up the COVID-19 task force. We had some questions about hydroxychloroquine purchase. One of them was for $800,000 for 20,000 doses. That money was eventually returned. There was another one for another 200,000 units. When we started asking questions about what was happening, it was hard to get answers as to who was in charge, who was in meetings. What kind of meetings are you involved in? Are you in these day-to-day decisions where we're deciding what money's spent? Or are you more of a figurehead that's there at the news conferences?
Sure. No, it's a very important question. And so when all of this started, my job, the governor asked me to bring together a team of experts here in the state. That team of experts were people from healthcare, people from public health, people that represented the economy, because we knew that this was going to have a devastating impact on the economy, people representing education, people representing every facet of this response. And to bring those experts together to make recommendations to the governor and to the legislature. And that's exactly what we did. People like Pamela Atkinson, who is representing our homeless friends and the nonprofits. People like Sid Dixon, representing education. And then, of course, representation from IHC, from the University of Utah Hospital. And we are so blessed in Utah to have experts who come together and help make those decisions. And that's exactly what we did. We gave advice to the decision makers, and we're really proud of what Utahns were able to do.
There are reports that in the spring, Utah spent $100 million or committed $100 million. I've no idea if that's true. I don't know any detail. Will there be a list soon? Here's what we did. Here's what we spent. here's where the money went.
Sure, Rod. Not only will there be a list soon, there was a list a month ago, and that's been shared with all the media outlets. They were able to come in. They were able to ask questions about every single contract, about every single dollar that was spent. Most of that money, by the way, went to broken supply chains coming out of China for personal protective equipment. Those were by far the largest expenditures to protect our healthcare workers on the front lines. This is a global pandemic. Every state in the nation, every nation in the world was trying to get the same stuff, the same materials. And Utah did a better job than most of bringing those materials in. And our manufacturers here actually started producing many of those materials so that we could protect our frontline workers.
Was $100 million about the right number? Or what was an overall number as to what we spent in that and in contracts and so forth?
Yeah, that's very close. And I'll remind people that money didn't come out of the education budget or somewhere else. The federal government gave us over $1 billion to devote specifically to the coronavirus crisis and to helping us be able to get the materials that we needed to protect people.
Okay, but that's $1 million. The number that I heard was $100 million. Is that just a fake number?
No, they gave us over $1 billion.
Oh, okay.
Over $1 billion for this. $100 million is what we spent to date to get the equipment that we need.
Let's talk about Test Utah right now. This was a big thing for Utah. While we were looking at New York City, they couldn't get enough tests done. They couldn't get ahead of it. Here in Utah, we had a public-private partnership that was lauded nationally. People were like, wow, look at Utah. They're getting more tests in. People can actually get tested if they're sick. But now when we're looking at it weeks later, there's questions about whether Test Utah's tests are reliable. There was a 20-page article in the New Yorker over the weekend about how Test Utah, that turned into Test Iowa and other states, may have been a $60 million failure. Your thoughts on that?
Well, so testing was and continues to be the biggest issue. When we sat down with experts on day one, they said the only way through this, and keep in mind, we were losing $20 to $30 million in GDP from our state every single day. And at the peak, we had 5,000 people filing for unemployment insurance every day. Testing was the only way out of that. And we have some of the best testing capacity and testing labs here in this state. However, we couldn't get tests. We couldn't get the reagent that you needed to run those tests. We couldn't get the swabs that you needed to get the samples to run the test. All of those things we were trying to figure out. And so we did what every state was trying to do. We looked out and said, who can help us do this? And we had some entrepreneurs that stepped up. And I know they've been criticized, but I'm here to tell you they saved us in many, many ways, and they deserve some respect for what they were able to do. They were able to use their supply chains in China and other places to get additional testing capacity here. And keep in mind, they didn't just create a new lab. They're using a lab from the Mount Timpanogos Hospital. This is a lab that does this kind of stuff all of the time, and one of the largest hospital chains in the country. Now, we have been monitoring their rates. They have had a low positivity rate. Part of that is because they're letting anybody come and get tested. So that's one of the reasons. The lab did go through a review, and there were some issues that were found with that lab. It was never shut down. They've been able to work on fixing those issues, and we feel that we have opened it up for a new RFP so that now because that was a no-bid contract in the moment that we had to do, now anyone can come and compete for that contract, and we're anxious to see what happens.
Very good. We want to move on to another question now.
You support President Trump's reelection. In the past, you've had some hard things to say about President Trump. You said, he said what all of us are thinking, Donald Trump, am an idiot, or at least that was what you were said to have said in a tweet. And you said he and Hillary may be the hardest people to think of. You have to think hard to think of someone you'd like less. Did you say hard things in the past? Have you changed your mind? How come you said such hard things and now you support it?
So, it's really interesting, Rod. Back, 4.5, 5 years ago, I did not support the president. I've been very clear about that. I supported other candidates. I worked on other candidates' campaigns. I tried hard to get them elected, and in the end, President Trump was elected. Now, I'm a kid. I'm a farm kid from Sanpete County, and I didn't think there was any way in the world that a billionaire from New York who had been a Democrat most of his life would care at all about rural Utah and the things that were important to me. I was wrong about that. The president does care about rural Utah. He's worked with us on several issues that are important. And so what I would say to that is you don't have to listen to anyone else. All you have to see is what we've been able to do over the past 4 years. Governor Herbert and I have a very good relationship with the president and vice president. We've worked very closely together on issues that are important to Utahns. And that's what Utahns care about. They care about our ability to work closely with the president and vice president to make sure that we're doing what is best for the people of the state of Utah. And so I do support him. Now, our styles are very different. There is no question about that. Washington, D.C. and Utah are very different. And so I'm me. I'm not him, but I do support him.
He says when the looting starts, the shooting starts. And he's been abrasive, people have said, about our current civil difficulties. Do you support him on that? Has he done the right thing? Has he said the right thing?
What I've said is I am very different than the president. I believe that here in Utah, what is important to the people of Utah is bringing people together to solve the issues that are most important to them. And so I'm not going to defend, I'm not going to talk about everything that he does or says, but what I am here to say is that we do have a good working relationship. That's what matters to the people of the state of Utah, and that I will represent Utah, and I will show the rest of the nation that there is a better way, that there is a way to bring people together. There is a way to solve our deepest problems, and we can show the nation how to do that.
Let's talk about Spencer Cox really quickly, move on to another issue here. The farm boy.
I love that. That's a great idea.
Lives in Fairview, Utah. You drive 200 miles round trip every day. I can't imagine doing that. It would stress me out. It would make me grouchy and not good at my job. If you were elected governor, are you going to continue making that drive every single day, or will you move with your wife and children up to the governor's mansion?
Yeah, so being able to serve as lieutenant governor has been the honor of a lifetime. But one of the conditions was that I wanted to stay in Fairview. We're raising our 4 kids on the farm that my great-great-great-grandfather settled 160 years ago. It was really important to us to not forget who we were and where we came from. And the governor let me do that. 200 miles round trip every day, 60,000 miles a year for 6.5 years. However, if elected governor, our plans are to move to Salt Lake City. We will go back on weekends. We will spend our weekends back in Sanpete County, but I'm going to do my part to clean up the air. And so if you really want clean air, vote for me, and I'll stop driving 200 miles every day. I got you with that one, Rod.
Yes, you did.
I did. I know. Doesn't happen very often, but I got you.
Clean air at a GOP debate. Would love it.
You said Utah needs some long-term tax reform, and you opposed part of what the legislature did, the food tax. Does Utah still need long-term tax reform? Is a vote for you a vote for, say, taxing services or sales tax on services, or what is it a vote for with respect to taxes and tax reform?
Yeah, so when the legislature was working through that tax reform package, this is one of the rare times, and I'm grateful. I talked to Governor Herbert and said, hey, I feel very strongly about this. Are you okay? Because I'm still the lieutenant governor. And he said, I understand, and I was able to come out in opposition to that because it raised taxes on food. It raised taxes on gas. It did some things, raised taxes on services. I'm also very proud of my candidate for lieutenant governor, my running mate, Senator Deidre Henderson. She was one of only 2 Republican senators that voted against that tax bill. That was something that was very important to me. So when I talk about long-term tax reform, we accomplished that after that tax reform was repealed. There is a constitutional amendment that will help us rebalance the way that we spend those tax dollars, still protecting education, but making it so it was never a problem of did we have enough funding. It was a problem of where could we spend those dollars. Now that change has been made, and with the support of the people of the state of Utah, we're in good shape for the foreseeable future.
You say protecting education, but that now income taxes are dedicated to education, then they will be much less so. How does that protect education?
Well, there's a couple reasons. What people don't realize is the legislature was shifting that money over anyway. They've been doing it for years and years. You know it. We've seen it happen. So what the guarantees that were made that we would put education.
I'm going to say time out because with those guarantees, but we're out of time. We're going to talk more about education and the debates in just a minute. Lieutenant Governor Spencer Cox, thanks for being with us. We're going to take a short break and be right back with former House Speaker Greg Hughes. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Spencer Cox is a proven leader and true conservative. A sixth-generation farmer, he was raised on Utah values of integrity, commitment, and hard work. He helped build one of the state's fastest-growing telecommunications companies, while also serving as a mayor, county commissioner, and state legislator. As lieutenant governor, he has led our state through remarkable prosperity and been a steady hand during challenging times. He is proven, principled, and he will always put Utah first.
Amongst the stars, the Earth is but a speck of cosmic dust. But for us, it's home. Every smile, every tear, every infinite memory will be made here. Everyone who ever was, or will be, lived out their lives on that speck. That is home.
Thanks to Garbett Homes for underwriting this 2 News debate. Let's go green together.
Greg Hughes is a real estate developer and former Utah Speaker of the House. He grew up in Pennsylvania, where he was raised by a single mother. Politics brought him to Utah. He came to the state to work on a campaign and ended up staying. He attended Utah Valley State College and Brigham Young University. In 2002, he was elected to the Utah House of Representatives, representing District 51. He served as the House Majority Whip and was elected as Speaker of the House in 2014 and 2016. He left office in 2018. Hughes has also been a radio host for both Red Meat Radio and Both Sides of the Aisle. He also appeared on KUTV's Take Two podcast. He's been chairman of the UTA and served on boards for organizations like United Way of Salt Lake, the Pioneer Park Coalition, Summit Academy Charter School, and Lone Peak Hospital. He and his wife, Krista, have been married for 25 years. They have 3 children and live in Draper. His running mate is Victor Iverson, the current Washington County Commissioner. Welcome back. Momentarily, we are going to be joined by former House Speaker Greg Hughes. He's sitting in front of us right now. We're having a small technical glitch waiting for his microphone to work. But when we get done talking to him, we're going to have 12 minutes like the other candidates, Rod. After that, we've got a couple debate-style sections where we're really going to get down to the nitty and gritty and let the candidates discuss amongst themselves.
Here, it's us on them. There, it'll be more them on each other. We'll be talking to Greg Hughes here, Speaker of the House, and we've got some questions for him, and we'll pretty soon. It's his microphones, I think. I think he's the problem. He says he's always the problem. I think he's the problem. But
we are working on that. And our first debate, after we get done speaking to Greg Hughes, we're going to be talking about social justice. We've seen protests in the streets of Salt Lake City and across the country, and also the COVID response. We talked to the Lieutenant Governor about that, but I do believe that all of the candidates want to have a say on the COVID response.
All of them are going to want to talk about COVID. All of them are going to want to talk about the economy. They like talking about the economy because they all say, I'm going to make it better.
It's true. And after that, we'll have another 20 minutes to be talking about the future. We're going to be talking about tax reform. It was passed and then killed. We're going to be talking about education. And when we're talking about education, Rod, we're talking about always not having enough money, and right now we're talking about major budget cuts because of the pandemic. So there's going to have to be some creativity in figuring out how we deal with these budgets going forward.
We face an enormous shortfall, and we're going to go to a break, and we'll be back in a minute. We're going to try to straighten this out.
I'm Provo Mayor Michelle Kafusi, and I'm proud to be running with Jon Huntsman.
I'm Senator Mike Lee, and I endorse Jon Huntsman for governor. He's someone who I trust implicitly.
This man has been an ambassador for action sports. Jon Huntsman has my vote.
We need Jon Huntsman as our next governor. He wants to preserve our heritage and make a better future for farmers and ranchers.
He has the temperament, the leadership, and the experience. Governor Huntsman can call the president. We need someone with those connections, and no one else has them but Jon.
The Burning Hands Jeff and Sally will be voting for Jon Huntsman Jr.
He's the type of leader who shoulder to shoulder can help navigate what's best for Utah at a global scale.
This is a proven leader, a proven person. I love his heart.
I'm Tim Ballard, and I'm voting for Jon Huntsman because Utah needs a governor that will keep our children safe.
You want someone that can give you the assurance that we're going to make it, that Utah's going to come out ahead.
I'm Jon Huntsman, and I am asking for your vote.
Take Two from 2 News. This is the podcast where we confront today's most pressing local and national issues.
But regardless where you come down on the issue, it's an unnecessary.
We have racial bias in Utah.
This is where we examine all sides as a challenge to find common ground.
Disagreement by itself is not discourse.
And if people feel like signing the referendum, by all means, do it.
There are things that we can do, practical things that we could all agree on.
This is Take Two. Subscribe today.
KUTV2 plus Stir, the new free TV. Stir is powered by KUTV2, streaming 2 News live and on demand, and classic TV. Plus, binge watch for free. Stir delivers 100 plus extra channels with more than 5,000 hours of TV shows and movies. The biggest plus of all, it's all free. No subscription necessary. KUTV2 plus Stir. Download now. Stir, the new free TV.
It's a new day. Keep it fresh with Carrie, Brooke, and Caitlin on KUTV's Fresh Living. Have some fun. Join the conversation.
If you have one movie you could watch over and over, what would it be?
Try something new.
Okay, my toes have never been cleaner. So gross.
Become part of the family.
Fabulous.
Perfect.
Look at that.
Watch Fresh Living weekdays at 1 on KUTV. It's a new day. Keep it fresh with Carrie, Brooke, and Caitlin on KUTV's Fresh Living. Join the fun and tune in to KUTV weekdays at 1 for Fresh Living.
Take Two from 2 News. This is the podcast where we confront today's most pressing local and national issues.
Party is not how I'm going to define my point of view.
There are things that we can do, practical things that we could all agree on.
This is Take Two. Subscribe today. Take Two from 2 News. This is the podcast where we confront today's most pressing local and national issues.
But regardless where you come down on the issue, it's an unnecessary.
We have racial bias in Utah.
This is where we examine all sides as a challenge to find common ground.
Disagreement by itself is not discourse.
And if people feel like signing the referendum, by all means, do it.
There are things that we can do, practical things that we could all agree on.
This is Take Two. Subscribe today.
We're here with Greg Hughes, former Speaker of the Utah State House of Representatives, candidate for governor. Welcome, Mr. Hughes.
Thank you, Rod.
You've been one of Utah's strongest Trump supporters.
Yes, sir.
Do you support him when he says, when he calls the rioters thugs?
Yeah, you know what? I think there's a lot of people frustrated by the violence. I don't know that it's even connected to the protests. You have protesters that saw what I saw that have been a recoil, but turning over police cars, burning them down, creating destruction, I don't think they're related to the people protesting.
He calls for force and domination in situations such as you've described. Is that what you believe in?
I believe in you got to have public safety. I believe that public safety is not an economic status. It's in your affluent neighborhoods as well as your cities. You got to have people that are safe. You got to have public safety, and you got to fight lawlessness. And I think that's been intuitive up until just recently.
Did Utah do right? Did Utah use sufficient force when we had our trouble here?
Not at all. It was 4 hours of unabated, uninterrupted violence. It could have been stopped earlier on. It got so out of hand they had to call law enforcement from multiple jurisdictions, had to call and deploy the National Guard. At the same time, Rod, you had police officers rousting out kids in playgrounds with adults saying you can't get too close to each other. You got a virus. And then you have in downtown Salt Lake City the kind of riots and violence we saw without being stopped. It's a bit of an upside-down world right now. Okay, now some of that, the cops are under the city, so it wouldn't have got to you as governor right away. But you'd have had the guard out sooner? I'll tell you this, we wouldn't let the Capitol be defaced and destroyed the way it was with the spray paint and everything else. There were 3 days where we saw nationally that this was happening. This should not have come as a surprise. We should be protecting our capital, our people, the people that live in those areas. We had people whose homes were destroyed or harmed, vandalized in that time. I think public safety is not an option. I think you have to have it.
If you were governor now, would the Guards still be mobilized? Would they be standing around to make sure this doesn't happen again?
Look, I've been, as you pointed out, I've been the Speaker of the House. I've been there for a long time. I've seen the command center. We've had multiple press conferences as we've done multiple law enforcement jurisdiction efforts from that command center at the Capitol. We are well within our right and ability as a state with our Department of Public Safety and whatever it would take to make sure that lawlessness does not run unabated and that public safety is preserved.
Let's talk a little bit about the inland port right now.
Yes.
You were the Speaker of the House when the inland port was created. After
Yes.
you left, there was a widening of that project. But this project largely takes over a big swath of land. It's Salt Lake City's land.
Yeah.
If you were governor, do you support this kind of concept in other parts of the state where sometimes the state can take over a local jurisdiction and say, this is for the best use of the state?
Yeah, Heidi, here's the inland port vision. You did have an area that had so much rail and infrastructure that it makes sense to have an inland port, maybe a hub and spoke. But as you've seen the protests, and it used to be that Salt Lake City wanted it, they just wanted to know who controlled it. It sounds like Salt Lake City as a population, they don't want it at all. As I've been a candidate going all over the state, I will tell you, there's many communities that have never seen a day of economic opportunity ever, but they have rail. If we can get the spurs, if we can bring in water and infrastructure, we can bring a system of U.S. custom bonded ports throughout the state where all these rail lines from every West Coast port comes into the state of Utah somewhere, not in the same place. And those communities, their elected officials, are excited for this. If Salt Lake City doesn't want it, there's plenty of areas in the state that need these kinds of economic engines that would take it.
If you're governor, is what I'm hearing this, if you're governor, you will try to get the inland port out of Salt Lake City.
Not out. We'll work with those who want to work with us. I think that the state bringing infrastructure investment, working with local jurisdictions, is a mighty advantage. I think there are communities that are shrinking in rural Utah that have not seen that kind of infrastructure investment. We're going to go as a state to the places where that makes most sense. And that's why you have an inland port board that I fought for so hard as Speaker. That board is not just made up of people just solely from Salt Lake City. It's members of county commissions from around the state as well. We'll have that rising tide and let there be a competition for that region of U.S. custom bonded ports.
When you enacted the port, Salt Lake City leaders, at least, didn't like what you did. You said, you're getting it, we're the legislature, you're getting it whether you like it or not. When you talk about public safety, you say, I'll call out the Guard, I'm going to have public safety. Is a vote for you a vote for the governor who overrides local government?
Rod, I love the question. Here's the thing. We worked for a number of years on the inland port project. Look, the state of Utah is studying an inland port because of this rail advantage, thanks to the Intercontinental Railroad, since 1978. Well, we worked for a number of years when I was Speaker. We were in my last session, so there was a lot of years previous where we were trying to work. Even in that session, Rod, we worked very closely with the city, but you get a sense sometimes that people are trying to run out the clock. And when we talk about the public safety and preserving it and fighting lawlessness, just like Operation Rio Grande, when I got outside my lane as Speaker of the House, we worked with the largest multi-jurisdictional law enforcement effort since the Winter Games. And that wasn't us just saying, we're going to do it without you. This is too big for one jurisdiction to handle, and we can't let that lawlessness, and they had competing drug cartels fighting each other for market share in that Rio Grande area. The lawlessness was terrible. I convened, and we worked together to get those things done, and that's what I do as governor.
Let's keep our focus there on Operation Rio Grande, because homelessness is an issue in our state now. It likely will be in the future. It has been in the past.
Yeah.
When you were Speaker of the House, you moved your office down there right in the middle of it. It was after there were 3 murders, I think, happened very closely after that. You worked on there. Operation Rio Grande was deemed largely a success, but this was a 3-step process. The final process hasn't happened. This last year, we've also seen that there was more money they needed. They weren't finished on time. Does there need to be a state czar over this, or is this something that the local cities and counties need to be working on their own?
Well, look, you have a state homeless coordinating committee chairman. It's the lieutenant governor. He was the chairman of this, Spencer Cox, before I got outside my lane and opened up the storefront right in the middle of all this lawlessness and the drug trafficking and all the things that were going on. We did come together, Speaker, Spencer Cox, and again, this large jurisdictional effort with the mayor of Salt Lake City, Salt Lake County. We took this on, but we put, before I left office, because I'm a recovering legislator now, I haven't been there since 2018, we put in statute, dates in statute, to make sure that this would not lose momentum and we would get these things done, like getting the resource centers built. When I left in December of 18, we were on schedule and on budget. We had one situation in South Salt Lake that was a little bit behind. When that statutory deadline came up on June 30th, 2019, after I've been out of office, watching this from afar, none of these were done. They're all over budget. They were all behind schedule. When they tried to make this transition happen, it was in the dead of winter or when it was coldest, which is your hardest time to transition to a new program. I've been very frustrated. All the while, you've had Spencer Cox as the chair of the State Homeless Coordinating Committee. And I'm going to tell you that I think there's been a lack of leadership there, and there's been a bit of a lack of focus. We've seen the emphasis we put on there and the measurables that we saw happen. We've seen those lost, and I see the lawlessness creeping right back up and preying upon people.
You've been a critic of so much shutdown for COVID. You thought that, okay, and they listened to you. They opened up. But as they opened up, more cases came and more people died. If you're governor, are you going to open the gates and are we going to have more COVID?
Rod, I'm going to tell you, we were told when we were asked to be self-quarantined, we were not eliminating cases. This wasn't the goal. It was you can't have, because we don't have a vaccine and we don't have an immunity to this virus. We were told that you had to not all get it in the state of Utah all within the same 2 weeks like Italy. So we want to spread those cases out. Not that they'll disappear or not happen, but we're going to spread those out over a longer period of time. We go inside, they change the rules. Then you see the state of Utah, Dane, what's an essential business, what's not. If you're a big box retailer, sky's the limit. You can have people in. If you're a locally owned business, you were forced to shut down and your employees were sent home. That isn't America. That's not the state of Utah. This shutdown created so many constitutional questions and consequences to the people of our state. Rod, I'm going to tell you, the working people of the state of Utah are bearing the full weight of this virus. If and when we see more people get it, as more strangers come together, we have to be much more strategic about it, and we cannot shut down our economy with an idea that we're somehow safer.
Get people back to work and let the cases come. Some deaths will come up to the capacity of our hospitals to handle it. Is that what I'm hearing?
I'm saying, look, the hospitals, our largest network of hospitals, just reported $400 million in losses of what would have been billable services. So you have empty hospitals right now that are not a public health safety strategy. So what I'm saying is we take precautions. We look at those that are older and medically frail. We inundate people and the public in the state of Utah with good information, let them drive good decisions. And this is what Utah needs, frankly. You need a governor that trusts the people of the state of Utah to make these good decisions and not take away people's liberties and not take their jobs away and get these kids back to school as well.
But you'll fill those beds, or those beds are there, and if they get filled, the important thing is to give people their freedom, give people their jobs, let people operate through the play.
Rob, it's a little bit of a false choice here. Look at the governor of South Dakota. They're not seeing their healthcare infrastructure overwhelmed, as she has not shut down that state wholly. I believe that we can do it in a smart way. Always practice precautions, especially for those that are medically frail and older. But we're a young state. We're one of the healthiest states in the union. How is it that we would look at New York or Illinois and go, well, we're better than them? Here's a news flash. They've never been a pace car for our state. When I was a state lawmaker, we never looked at Illinois or New York as the standard, whether we were doing better or worse. It's never been that. We can do better than we've done now. We've learned a lot. You cannot take jobs away from people. You cannot shut down their businesses. And these kids have to get back to school. The consequences of not doing it this way are very dire.
We only have a minute left here. Over the weekend, you were in Cedar City at the Colin Ray concert with the Utah Business Revival. We're sitting in the Eccles Center right now, where normally they have shows and crowds. We've got the Vivint, we've got Real Stadium, we've got Tuacahn, Shakespeare, Health Center, name it. They have huge crowds. If we had a Governor Hughes right now, would you open those up? Would we open for business where we have hundreds, if not thousands of people in the same place?
Eccles Theater. The Vivint Home Arena. I trust that people, we all have our interests aligned here. This is what we can't forget. It is not up to government to decide who's irresponsible and who's responsible, and with some heavy hand decide what you can and can't do. Vivint Home Arena, they're going to be smart. They want the patrons that will come into that arena to be healthy. They're going to make decisions that are smart based on good information. Patrons, fans, they're going to make good decisions based on what their circumstances are. If we just look at liberty and let the whole Bill of Rights and our constitutionally protected liberties apply, we don't go wrong. That has not happened up till now, and it needs to start happening right away.
All right, Mr. Hughes, thank you so much. We are out of time. We're going to take a quick break and be right back with all 4 candidates hashing out the issues. Thank you.
Thanks.
Amongst the stars, the Earth is but a speck of cosmic dust. But for us, it's home. Every smile, every tear, every infinite memory will be made here. Everyone who ever was, or will be, lived out their lives on that speck. That is home.
The biggest mistake we can make right now is to think small. Today we have the highest unemployment on record, but I believe Utah has the opportunity to do great things. My economic plan will double Utah's economy over the next 10 years. That's how we fund education, manage our growth, and extend prosperity to every part of our state. Utah has long been known as the crossroads of the West. I believe we have a new destiny to become crossroads of the world. I'm Jon Huntsman, and I am asking for your vote.
Thanks to Garbett Homes for underwriting this 2 News debate. Let's go green together. It's a new day. Keep it fresh with Carrie, Brooke, and Caitlin on KUTV's Fresh Living. Have some fun. Join the conversation.
If you have one movie you could watch over and over, what would it be?
Try something new.
Okay, my toes have never been cleaner. So gross.
Become part of the family.
Fabulous.
Perfect.
Look at that.
Watch Fresh Living weekdays at 1 on KUTV.
Does your DNA hold clues that could help defeat coronavirus?
What are the differences between people who don't get infected and people who do?
I'm Josie Sturman for Spotlight on America.
The new things researchers have learned about a potential link between blood type and COVID.
Impactful, investigative advocacy journalism. National Headliner Award winning. Spotlight on America. Thursday on 2 News at 10.
Take 2 from 2 News. This is the podcast where we confront today's most pressing local and national issues.
But regardless where you come down on the issue, it's an unnecessary move.
We have racial bias in Utah.
This is where we examine all sides as a challenge to find common ground.
Disagreement by itself is not discourse.
And if people feel like signing the referendum, by all means, do it.
There are things that we can do, practical things that we could all agree on.
This is Take 2. Subscribe today.
Each day, more of Utah reopens, and you have new questions about safety. 2 News is getting those answers for you, giving you the facts about the recovery.
The coronavirus may just be a speed bump for Utah's housing market.
Informing you on the state's plans to get Utahns back to work.
More people stopped filing for unemployment claims.
And covering how you can stay safe as we get back to normal.
The governor wants to make it clear that symptom checking should be happening whenever possible.
It's all about Utah's path forward, and every day we'll guide you through each step.
It's a new day. Keep it fresh with Carrie, Brooke, and Caitlin on KUTV's Fresh Living. Have some fun. Join the conversation.
If you have one movie you could watch over and over, what would it be?
Try something new.
Okay, my toes have never been cleaner. So gross.
Become part of the family.
Fabulous.
Perfect.
Look at that.
Watch Fresh Living weekdays at 1 on KUTV.
Does your DNA hold clues that could help defeat coronavirus?
What are the differences between people who don't get infected and people who do?
I'm Josie Sturman for Spotlight on America.
The new things researchers have learned about a potential link between blood type and COVID.
Impactful, investigative advocacy journalism. National Headliner Award winning. Spotlight on America. Thursday on 2 News at 10.
Mr. Wright, we're back here with all of them on stage, and we're going to ask some questions. Mr. Wright, I don't know whether you heard Mr. Hughes, but he was pretty clear. He is for law and order. He says call out the guard. He says cops should be tough, and he doesn't mind that the president called the rioters thugs. Do you agree with that?
Well, that's a lot to unpack in one statement, Rod. Let me tell you, the most American thing that we can do in this country is protest. And I believe in peaceful protest. No matter what you're protesting, you have the right to do that. But when a protest turns to violence, it turns to arson, and it turns to destruction of personal property, it closes businesses or vandalizes businesses, then that's when they've overstepped the bound. And I do believe in law and order in that case, and we have to take action when that happens.
Did the governor, was he too late calling out the guard? Should they have been here before the rioters ever got to the police car?
I think he was a little late. The night before, we saw what happened in Minneapolis. I think we should have been ready the next day. It was pretty obvious when the crowd was forming that there was the possibility that there was going to be vandalism and some unruly behavior. And so I would have had the guard there a little bit earlier.
Do we need to do anything in Utah to meet the demands of these protesters? Do we need to pass some new laws, defund police? Is there anything we need to do?
Of course, we need to listen to every protest, and we need to take the best of what they're saying. People are trying to make a point. They're frustrated. So the answer to your question is absolutely. In the wake of George Floyd's murder, we need to have a serious conversation in this country about racism and how to eliminate it. And I, as governor, want to be part of that solution, Rod. I want to listen. I want to learn. And I want to tell people that I'll be part of the solution.
Outlaw chokeholds?
Absolutely.
How about defund, cut budgets for police?
That's a different question. What we're talking about with defunding, Rod, you have to make sure that your viewers understand what defund means. Defund means reform police. Is there a better way for us to police? There might be, but we need to do that thoughtfully. We need to do it practically. We need to have all the shareholders at the table, and we need to make sure that we don't put public safety at risk by doing it too quickly and not having a very clear definition of what that means.
Do you want to talk about this?
Anyone else who wants to respond?
Anyone? Okay.
Sure. Yeah.
Let's go to you. Do you agree with what Mr. Hughes said, that what's important here is law and order, and your administration was late in getting out the garden and applying force?
Well, look, right, there is a difference between protesting and rioting, and the people of Utah understand that. I'm very proud of our police officers and the way they protected the peaceful rights of protesters to get their message out. I'm proud of our National Guardsmen who stepped up in very difficult circumstances. This is a critical moment in our state's history, in our nation's history, giving us the opportunity to talk about real change. And we are changing policies. I chair the Multicultural Commission. We've met with the Martin Luther King Commission. The governor has already announced some of those very important changes. But more important than that, this past week, I sat down with a black mom, 5 boys, where she talked about real racism that's happening here in our state. It was devastating to hear those examples. We can change all the policies and laws in the world, but if we don't change our culture, we're never going to get better at this. And I also sat down with the police officer, Rod, and talked. He was on the front lines that night. He was dodging rocks and bottles. And we talked about how we're asking our police officers to do too much. They're doing things that they were never intended to do. We are investing in mobile crisis outreach teams. We have to deal with the mental health crisis that we have on the streets. That's not the purpose of cops. They should not be tasked with doing that. We can add more funding to cops to help them with their training while also changing the culture and eliminating racism from our society.
Do you believe that some Utah police are racist or have acted in a racist way recently in these troubles?
So I have had the opportunity, as the mayor of my town, I was over the police department. I was, as a county commissioner, I was over the sheriff's department. I work daily with our highway patrol troopers. I have not met a racist cop in this state. Now, that doesn't mean they're not out there. It's very possible that there are. There are good and bad in everything. But we have to change the policies that are impacting people like chokeholds. That's something we can eliminate, and we are.
Hughes, would you like to respond?
I would. So look, this issue about riots versus protests, it is absolutely the case that the protests are appropriate. And sadly, I think there was a moment in our nation's history and in the state of Utah where it didn't matter what party you were, what color, race, creed. We recoiled from what we saw in that video of George Floyd. We were all very upset. We all wanted justice. But there's a very big difference between how we all felt and the rioting and the violence that occurred afterwards. That civil unrest, I don't believe they actually even cared about what happened to that poor man. It was an opportunity to divide this nation further, and this is not a splash on all law enforcement across this country or state. We have to have reforms or issues to deal with law enforcement, I would argue a see and report policy that says if law enforcement sees excessive force from a fellow officer, even if it's a superior officer, they are required to report that there's not an uncomfortable situation or one that they wouldn't intervene, that see and report has to happen. Community involvement, like our state troopers and our state highway patrol, where we ask them to be involved in Operation Rio Grande, talking to the people in that community before and during the time that they were also protecting public safety and fighting lawlessness. You saw the community embrace these members of law enforcement as they were involved. So community involvement, see and report issues are for law enforcement. But I will tell you this, racism or what we feel and how we feel as a community, let's not just shoehorn it into one area of our society, into law enforcement. It's not fair.
Mr. Huntsman, you wanted to talk.
Yeah, thank you. Listen, I appreciate all the words that have been spoken by some really excellent candidates. There's one word that I want the public to remember in all of this: leadership. Because I saw something on the streets of Salt Lake that I've never seen before. I saw a Black Hawk helicopter in the sky, and I saw Humvee heavy armored personnel carriers on the ground. Now, when you see this in a place like Moscow or Beijing, it's an admission that you have failed in the most basic task to carry on a meaningful dialogue with those with whom you disagree. Leadership is about locking arms with the police, and I'm delighted and honored to carry the endorsement of the Fraternal Order of Police, but also those who have grievances. We are a civil society. This is how we operate. We don't send in the heavy artillery unless it's a admission of failure. As governor, I did in the past, and I will do it again. Bring people together for purposes of finding solutions. This is a time in our nation's history, not unlike, Rod, the 60s that you'll remember, that I remember somewhat, where we have moments in civil society. This is where the words of Alexis de Tocqueville come out and ring true. America's a great country, not because Americans are so special or great. America's a great country because we have the ability to repair our wounds. This is a time when we all must pull together to repair our wounds.
Was it wrong to call out the National Guard in these troubles?
I would do everything possible through negotiations and direct communication with those who have grievances, as much as I disdain the lawlessness and the anarchy.
Mr. Huntsman,
before
thank you.
I'd want the heavy armor in the streets.
It's time to move on to our next question. The next question goes to Mr. Cox. We spoke shortly about defunding our police. A lot of the protesters are calling for reform of our policing agencies. Do we need to do this by going through and, quote unquote, defunding each police department in the cities and counties, or do we go about it the way Governor Herbert has, where he just recently banned chokeholds? Who should do this reform?
Well, look, defunding the police is the worst possible thing that we could do right now. Again, we have been ahead of the curve here in Utah, unlike many states where we've put actually more training in place for de-escalating, helping police officers understand what they can and shouldn't do in these types of situations. As I talk to law enforcement officials across the state, they actually agree with most of the things that the protesters are talking about. They were devastated by what they saw in that video with George Floyd. Many of our police departments have already banned chokeholds. And so what the governor did was absolutely appropriate. By the way, right now, we've called a legislative session for later this week, and legislators are working together with the executive branch and with law enforcement from all across the state to put into place these changes that everyone agrees on, that aren't necessary for good policing. And as I said before, it's not a time to defund police. It's a time to add funding. Specifically, I don't know if you know this, but in 50% of fatal shootings with a police officer, there is a mental health component, a mental health issue with the person who has lost their life. So what we have done over the past couple years, we have invested in what we call mobile crisis outreach teams. When there is a mental health issue, when you call 911, far too often we send a cop and we send an ambulance, people end up in the emergency room. Now what we're doing is we send a nondescript van with 2 mental health experts who can help to de-escalate the situation. We don't have to get the police involved. That's not what they're supposed to be doing. It's not what they're trained to do, and we're asking them to do too much. So these are changes that we can work on together. These are changes that we're working on with the legislature. We're working on with police. We're working on with the Martin Luther King Commission here in the state, and we are going to make a difference, and we are going to show the nation that there is a better way, that we can come together, that we can bring people together, people who see the world differently. We can solve these problems, and we can do it together as Utahns.
Mr. Hughes, you wanted to talk.
Yeah, I just heard chokehold about 3 times. I'm going to tell you what the real issue here is. When we saw this violence escalate in Salt Lake City, and we saw it get so far out of hand that multiple jurisdictions had to come in. And look, I don't think it should not be a governor's first option to militarize or call in the National Guard. But when you let something go unabated for as long as that happened, you don't ignore it. You have to do something. Here is your problem. The Sunday after police officers were harmed, National Guardsmen were harmed, this situation got so far out of hand. The quote from the mayor and the issued statement from Mayor Mendenhall in Salt Lake City was to the public and to the citizens of Salt Lake City, if you witnessed any misconduct by the members of the National Guard or of law enforcement, please contact our office. That is pitting the public against our law enforcement, our National Guard. I got to tell you, you can't raise these kids to think that the police and law enforcement are the bad guys. You can't do that. This is not going to end well if you don't have the public servants that will lead, that will invest and take the arrows for public safety and fighting lawlessness. That has to come from the top up. You get mayors with all kinds of political agendas that these poor chiefs of police and their law enforcement agencies have to live under. That's not what they trained for. That's not what they're trying to do by serving the public.
Are we done with this?
Any other responses on this issue? Mr. Huntsman.
Yeah, I still haven't heard anything about what we're going to do about it. I mean, we have a legitimate issue here. We have legitimate grievances.
What are you going to do about it?
We have issues with the police. They are underfunded, undertrained, underappreciated, and they work their hearts out, and they do everything humanly possible. And we've got people who have taken to the streets. People don't take to the streets in this country unless they have no other means by which they can express their grievances and their disagreements. We have got to have leadership that sits down, puts together a roadmap, listens. So we've been given 2 ears and 1 mouth, and it's rare in politics that people actually use it in that ratio. How about listening for a while to both sides, to both those who have a grievance and those who proudly wear the uniform of law enforcement, because we've got some work to do, and it's going to spill into the next administration. It's not going to be solved between now and the end of the year. This will be the responsibility of the next governor. And we need to make sure that the next governor is prepared to do the right thing, to make the right decisions, and to bring us toward problem solving and solutions. That's the only way forward. That's the way this country and the state have always worked.
Mr. Wright.
One of the things I've promised in this campaign is that I won't talk in platitudes and generalities and just talk around issues. I'm the only candidate on this stage that has proposed a specific solution based on the protests. I, as governor, will direct the Department of Public Safety, the head of the Department of Public Safety, to go to the Peace Officer Standards and Training Council, the Post Council, and review the curriculum for new and existing police officers. They want to be a part of the solution in fixing the challenges that we see. They're wonderful men and women. They want to see racism end in this country. And by going to the Post Council and making those changes now, we can start to implement the proper training, modernizing it for what we're seeing in today's world. So that's a very specific thing of what Governor Wright will do when elected.
Mr. Huntsman, for you, a different topic. You have criticized Lieutenant Governor Cox and the current administration over COVID. You've said they politicized it, and you've said they've been inefficient. Utah has done pretty well in some respects. For example, a low death rate, low hospitalization rate. Overall, have we done pretty well?
Listen, I have worked closely with our public health officials over the last week, and there is no group of people for whom I have higher respect or admiration than the people who wear the banner of public health experts. They're doing their best. They're working around the clock, and they really are the heroes of our modern time. My only complaint early on was that the COVID task force was being used for political purposes, in my opinion. The task force should be run by experts and professionals. The governor should lead it, set the priorities, and then the professionals should do their work. That's why they're there. And to me, it was an example of where it had been used inappropriately for political purposes.
Does anyone want to speak to that? Mr. Wright.
Utahns can be trusted to do the right thing, and that's why we did well. This is a typical pattern that we see with our current lieutenant governor, is that they take credit when things are going really well. The reason that Utah did well in the pandemic is because we had responsible businesses and citizens who took it seriously, who helped each other out, who did things the Utah way. It wasn't government that did it, just like it's not government who built our economy. We have to recognize that what did happen with Lieutenant Governor on the task force, the things that he was directly in control of, were the things that went awry. The no-bid contracts, the $800,000 on a medicine contracted for $8 million, an app for $6.6 million that violates our civil liberties that still isn't working. The things that he was directly control and over are the very things that aren't working, and then he wants to take credit for the things that the people of the state of Utah did. I think the people should get the credit because we're the ones that went into lockdown. We're the ones that made it happen in our businesses. And as a business owner, I can tell you, my employees made it happen by staying at home, working, and redefining themselves. Our teachers made it happen by teaching from home and redefining themselves. Our students made it happen by being flexible in their households. The citizens are the ones that made it happen. The things that the coronavirus task force are over are a disaster, and that's what the lieutenant governor should be talking about.
Mr. Hughes.
So look, if you don't know the problems that you've created or what's happening in the state of Utah, if you're the governor of the state, how do you even begin to address it? I have heard all kinds of proud proclamations of how well this state has done. Let me just say, you have a health care crisis. You cannot have our largest network of hospitals and clinics, Intermountain Healthcare, report over $400 million of losses where they would have otherwise billed for health care delivery that's never happened. Think about what that means by way of health care that people have sought or needed to get that they weren't. The health care consequences of what we've seen broadly in here has been unbelievable. The entitlement spending. Spencer Cox, he fought for Obamacare expansion. This entitlement spending by more federal money is absolutely unsustainable. It was before a virus. It will be even worse now as we've seen what? The economy shut down, where the government shut down the economy. You have to understand that if you don't have the economy working, you don't have tax collection coming. So anyone that wants to tell you that we need more money for schools and everything else, if this economy isn't given a chance to recover, you're not able to do the things that people have come to depend on our state to do.
Mr. Cox.
Well, thanks, Rod. In the immortal words of Ronald Reagan, there they go again. Ladies and gentlemen, we've talked about this. We talked about it in the earlier segment. The people of the state of Utah have made a tremendous sacrifice in the worst of circumstances. We are facing a global pandemic unlike anything that we've seen in over 100 years, an economic crisis unlike anything we've seen in our lifetimes. And the people of Utah have responded in incredible ways. I can only imagine how I would have been attacked if I wasn't doing my job. I'm very proud of the people of this state. I've said before, the response was not perfect, but under the circumstances, I would put that response up against any other state in this nation and against any other country in this world. The people of Utah can be proud of the way that we bonded together, that we worked together to save lives and to save the economy. We have to point out that we led the nation with the fewest job losses despite what we were able to do. We were one of only 7 states that didn't have a statewide lockdown, and yet we do have one of the lowest mortality rates in the country. That happened because we all worked together. We made mistakes, we worked through those mistakes, we've made changes, and we've come together as a state. And so I understand criticism is going to come. It's part of leadership. Part of leadership is being able to take that criticism and to weather it. I promise you, as your governor, we will continue to work together through this crisis. We built the best economy in the country over the last 10 years, and we will do it again.
Those are hollow words from people, if they listen to that, who've lost their livelihoods and have lost their jobs.
Mr. Huntsman would like to respond.
No, I think leadership is about taking responsibility. It's standing up and taking accountability where we have no answers in terms of how money was spent on no-bid contracts over $100 million worth. We have little information about why a trace testing company that we paid almost $3 million to, and $300,000 per month in a service contract was taken over somebody willing to provide it for free. So I just think that with the auditor who was looking into some very important questions, why don't we get answers to some of these questions, because we don't have them yet? Where is the money gone? Who's benefited from it? And what did the state get out of it? So I'm coming off of a very interesting experience, because I hear that we're best in class here and there, which is interesting. So it took 4 to 5 days to get my test back. Talking to people in other states and one foreign country, it was no more than a 24-hour turnaround. ARUP, quick. Intermountain Healthcare, quick. The state efforts, despite whatever they're doing right, and I know they're doing a lot right, I'm just not criticizing, but I'm just trying to point something out, having lived through this, and the absolute hell my family went through in a period of uncertainty for days, not knowing whether we were positive or negative. And I'm just doing what a lot of other people have done, and I think it deserves more than just saying we are best in class. Listen, we had 6 people diagnosed in our office. They got 6 different descriptions about what they should do in terms of follow-up.
Heidi, am I okay to respond to that?
We actually need to move on to the next question right now. Mr. Hughes, right now there's a race for a vaccine right now, and as we're looking to the future of the COVID response in our state, when a COVID-19 vaccine becomes available, could or should our state government have the right to mandate that vaccine as a stipulation of stopping the spread, to open businesses, to let kids go back to school? Can the state mandate that, or should it?
Absolutely not. Look, this vaccine that we would like to see, that will be up to adults, self-determining adults. Adults should be deciding these decisions about their medical future, whether it be the children that are born into this world and the 76+ vaccines, the vaccinations that they could or should get or would get. But the good information is going to drive good decisions for parents in terms of whether they decide as parents to do that. And what we cannot do as adults is imagine that we're going to require, mandate that these vaccines are taken, or say, okay, you can decide whether you want to take it or not, have this vaccine, but you can't get on an airplane if you don't. You can't go to a federally insured bank. I've seen this with the federal government where they've taken their heavy hand and they've compelled behavior through their funding, through their systems. You need a governor that's going to spot this, track it, and also keep that from happening. Adults have every right to decide what they're going to do with their medical future.
You wanted to talk, Mr. Cox.
Well, I was just going to respond to the previous question, but to this one, I will say that it is important that we give people that choice. That being said, we're, of course, going to encourage people, assuming we have a vaccine, which we think we're going to, assuming that the vaccine is safe, we're going to do everything we can to encourage parents and children to take advantage of that vaccine so that we can protect the most vulnerable amongst us. I have 2 siblings that both have cystic fibrosis. If they get this disease, it could likely be the end of their life. This is real to so very, very many people. And I hope that the people of Utah, I know the people of Utah will take this very seriously, that they will do everything they can to protect themselves and protect the people of the state, but should not be a mandated vaccine.
Last topic on the last shot.
Well, it's important to know who you're electing and what their governing values will be. As governor, the 2 things that will never happen in a pandemic is, number 1, or an emergency, I will not govern by executive order. We may have to make an executive order, but we will not govern on a continuing basis like that. That's why we have a legislative branch. That's why we have elected people in a republic, so that they can make the decisions. That's number 1. And number 2, you can never have no-bid contracts. We've seen it happen, and I would love for the lieutenant governor today to just answer some questions about where that $100 million went. We still don't have answers to that. And I would like to know where the money is, and so would a lot of taxpayers. On vaccinations, we have to do exactly what the proper role of government is. The proper role of government in a pandemic is to give us the information and then allow us the freedom and liberty to make our own choices. It's the same with vaccinations. We give people the information, we give them the ingredients, we tell them the upsides and the downsides, and then we allow them to choose. That choice is an important principle in our country. Especially important with vaccinations when vaccination manufacturing companies are exempt from any liability. If anything happens when you take a vaccination, you have no recourse against them if they have no liability. That is a problem, and so we need to allow people to choose whether or not they want to do that, and I will make that decision for me and my children.
Rod, if I could just respond, because it's come up twice, and I think I just need to clarify here. Every dime that was spent is public. I feel bad that they didn't get the information. I'm happy to email it to them tonight when I get home. Every single contract, every single dollar that was spent on the coronavirus response, we've released it to the media. We held public hearings to allow them to ask questions. Every single dime, there is nothing hidden. Everyone in this state can see where that money was spent, and I'm happy to share it with my colleagues.
Mr. Huntsman, last comment.
Why do we have the state auditor looking into the numbers? If we had everything we needed via transparency, why is it that he is taking the time that will actually go after the primary? And that's one of my biggest concerns. I mean, why don't we get greater clarity in this before the end of the primary? I think there are some key questions here that people would like answers to.
Mr. Huntsman, thank you very much. We are going to go to a short break and be back with more issues facing the state of Utah as we head into the next few years.
I have spent almost 7 years working closely with my Lieutenant Governor, Spencer Cox. He is a proven leader and a true conservative who is deeply committed to our state and its future. I trust his judgment and vision, especially in challenging times. This recovery is too important to leave to chance. Spencer helped me lead our economy into the most prosperous period in state history. I trust him to do it again. Vote for Spencer Cox to be Utah's next governor.
Utah has had a one-party government for too long. Many of our leaders have lost touch with the public. Recently, Utahns have voted for Medicaid expansion, medical marijuana, and better political boundaries, only to have the legislature repeal those election results because they think they know more than we do. Now leaders are trying to raise taxes on food. That's the problem with a one-party government. It's time we have a governor who listens to voters.
I'm Chris Peterson. I endorse this message, and I ask for your vote on November 3rd.
We're back. Mr. Huntsman, the governor came out tonight and said we have a shortfall of $850 million, largely due to COVID. The legislature will meet. They'll make some cuts. We have a reserve fund. Would you spend the reserve fund first? Where would you cut? Where would you not cut?
Well, we probably got $93 million in one time and probably $750 million in ongoing. So it's a big number. But you know what else? So is our ability to grow the economy. That's why I'm so excited about our economic plan. But meanwhile, we have $1 billion in the rainy day fund. And if it isn't raining out there, I don't know when it is. So the ability to prioritize, and for me, priorities would include education. I want to keep education as harmless as possible, making sure we can make adjustments for inflation and enrollment growth, but social services as well, particularly mental health, because this is a scourge in our state, and I want to declare war on this insidious problem. We have become the buckle of the suicide belt in the United States. And whatever we can do to help our good legislators who are trying their best to come up with new approaches to long-term visions and planning on mental health is something we really, really need to focus on. So those would be my priorities.
So this special session is happening this week, and I have to give credit to our Office of Management and Budget together with the legislature who have worked so closely on these issues. And I can tell you what's going to be prioritized. Education is going to be the top priority. Social services and mental health issues will also receive a top priority. And the best news for the citizens of the state of Utah is that we have been preparing for a downturn like this for many, many years. Not just the rainy day fund. We have a working rainy day fund where we have been using ongoing money to pay for one-time projects, which means that that money is now available. We can use that to fill in some of these gaps. And something even more important, as one of the 3 members of the bonding commission, every state bonds for roads and prisons. We were able to go, because we were paying cash for those here in the state of Utah, we were able to be the first state to get to the bond market. We got a rate of 1.156%, the lowest in our state's history, which is going to free up money for these critical issues.
How much do you expect education to be cut? If you were governor, when would you veto? When would you say you can't cut them that much?
I don't expect education to be cut at all, Rod. I really don't. They won't get everything they were hoping to get in the new budget season, but we'll be stable where we were last year, and that's critical for teachers and the kids in our classroom.
Okay, but what you're saying is the future budget will be cut, not the past budget.
So we will keep things where they were going into July 1st.
In this race, we have 3 professional politicians and 1 person with a lot of political experience, but a lot of business leadership. For 12 years, I've looked at financial statements. I've had to make cuts. This opportunity we have right now, we can make lemonade out of lemons with the pandemic. We need to cut spending. We need to go through the budget and be very strategic, and we need to ask ourselves the question, is our spending matching our priorities? Public education is our #1 priority. We've talked about other priorities tonight. This is a great opportunity for the state of Utah to reel in spending that got a little bit out of control in the economic run-up when times were flush and things were easy. I've had to do it in my business, and it's been a tremendous opportunity to make things better. Let's do it now in state government. That's why you need to elect somebody that has business executive leadership experience like Thomas Wright.
This week they'll meet. Where are you going to tell them to cut?
Well, I wish I could be there in the room, Rod. I really do. We need to look at the budget from top to bottom, but we need to answer the question.
Can you name? You said you weren't going to talk in generalities. Give us some specific
I love that
cuts.
I'm the only one that you cut off, Rod. That means you like me. I know that about you. I will tell you this. We have to ask this question every time we look at the budget. Are we spending money according to our priorities? If you have time after, I'll take you through the state budget, and I will show you line items that aren't as important as public education, mental health, transportation infrastructure, rural Utah. I will take you through, and I will show you items. This is our opportunity to right that wrong. That's why we need to elect somebody new from the outside that didn't create all this spending.
Okay, Steve Jobs said that if you want to make everybody happy, don't be a leader, sell ice cream. You've heard a lot of ice cream in here. I'm going to tell you the truth, and I'm going to connect the dots. The legislature is not cutting a dime from this budget. What they are doing at $850 million is the revenue's not arrived. There isn't commerce occurring for tax collection to occur. The dollars aren't there. They are now balancing budgets because the state doesn't print money to balance it out with what is arriving. Every single day, this state is in a code yellow. Every single day, this economy and people are not allowed to go back to their jobs, get back to work, back to school, having our kids back. This hole that we're in, we just keep digging, and it gets bigger and bigger. And when I hear that education, which is the 2nd largest item in our budget, used to be almost my entire time in the legislature the largest budget item, to say that it's going to be held harmless and there's never going to be a cut, we are not telling the public and the Utahns the truth. You can't be all things to everybody. We're in some tough times here, but you really can't deal with this honestly if you're not willing to see this economy get back and started. That's priority 1 if you don't want to see any more cuts in this state budget.
All right, time. Mr. Huntsman, last response. We move on to the next question.
I love Hughes, but you know, in all of those words, I didn't hear the word growth. So we're spending a lot of verbiage and a lot of political rhetoric on things other than what really is going to matter going forward. The only thing under the next governor that will matter in paying the bills is how quickly do we grow? Who's got an economic plan that will actually get us back on our feet? Who's best positioned to double the output of our state's economy? And that's what I love about our economic plan. I have been there before. I've pulled these levers of decision-making on the economy. I understand how it's done. There's only one way forward, and that is through good growth plans that looks at taxes and regulatory reform. I don't think we've reviewed regulations in the state for probably 10 years, and we may have thousands of new laws and regulations on the books that are stifling startup and growth. All of this needs to be looked at, and I'm really excited about the prospects of being able to put these ideas to the test once again.
Thank you, Mr. Huntsman. The next question is actually going to you. Mr. Hughes, next topic here. We want to talk tax reform. Governor Herbert had an effort to pass tax reform. It was passed in the legislature in December. It was quickly repealed in January. The people of Utah revolted with the food tax. If you are governor, will you tackle tax reform, or is this not the time to do it?
So look, getting back to work is all about growth. I'm going to tell you right now that the way we see revenue rise and the way we did it, look, we did this. Some of us did this together. We cut $400 million in taxes. You know what that did? When you cut income tax from a 7% progressive rate to a flatter 5%, when you take the tax off of food, we were told, hey, you're taking money away from our budget, from education and other priorities. When you leave that $400 million back in our economy, in people's households, what did we see? It's not a theory. We saw the revenue rise. The way we see our revenues rise in the state of Utah and the economy going upwards and people seeing prosperity is that you grow the pie, you emphasize economic growth, and that's in the immediacy right now, getting back to work, but that's also the long-term plan of seeing the rest of the state. You cannot shoehorn all of 80% of Utah's population is in 4 counties in the Wasatch Front and the Valley. There are at least 22 counties that have never seen a day of economic opportunity. We have to see that economic growth happen throughout the state. That's the long term.
All right, time.
Mr. Wright,
We need political leaders that believe that it's possible. We have been led so long by professional politicians that say it's not possible to cut spending. Of course, it's important to grow the economy, but it's also important to tighten your belt. That's what Utahns are doing right now in their households. I'm the only candidate in this race that's given out his personal phone number. I've taken hundreds of calls from Utahns. I'm more connected to them than anyone else in this race. They are tightening their belts. Businesses are tightening their belts. Government needs to do the same thing. Tighten our belt, reduce spending. We're always being told by professional politicians that it can't be done. You can't cut spending. Government's just going to grow and there's nothing you can do about it. But there is something you can do about it. You can prioritize your spending just like we do in the business world and in our families. And we can make government more efficient. We can get more for less. But we've got to elect new people who are willing to make those hard decisions and don't owe anybody anything.
Mr. Cox.
You know, during the Great Recession, I was serving as a county commissioner, and we got budget numbers that were very difficult, much like we have heard today. And I remember receiving an email from some of my colleagues saying, we have no choice but to raise taxes during this difficult time. It's the only way we'll be able to manage the budget and balance the budget. And I still have my response to them. I wrote back and said, this is not the time. We are not going to do budget reform. What we are going to do is we are going to tighten our belts. I'm going to put together a plan that will help us to balance our budget without adding one dime of taxpayer dollars, because that's what the people of Sanpete County expected. I will do the same thing as your governor. I've done it before and will do it again.
Mr. Huntsman.
Well, what happened to the food tax? I mean, the last round of tax reform, how come you all were in favor of ramping up the sales tax on food? I mean, Hughes and I worked really hard, along with some other great legislators, in taking it off almost in its entirety. It was part of comprehensive tax reform that really had never been done in the state. Largest tax cut in the history of this state. Delivered the first flat tax, the kind of thing that really got noticed by the international marketplace and investors everywhere. And that's really what put us on the map in a very big way. So let's be careful about when we talk about, upping taxes and cutting taxes. I think that's one of the reasons that this administration failed at the recent round of tax reform. They were tone deaf on the whole sales tax on food discussion.
I just have to point out that I did oppose the tax on food, and my lieutenant governor candidate was one of only 2 Republican senators to vote against the tax on food.
But in all fairness, Lieutenant Governor, you were part of crafting that package. You got off late, but that is not exactly how it happened.
Okay.
Any other responses real quick before we leave this topic? The next question is going to go to Mr. Cox. I want to talk education right now because we've been bottom of the barrel spending for decades now. We spend about $7,600 per student. This is a problem even in a normal year, but right now we're talking about cutting 2%, 5%, 10% across the board. Do we go to the rainy day fund to get the money we need for education right now? Are we going to have to raise taxes? How do we pay for what we want to do with education?
So again, we're not going to cut 2%, 5%, or 10% from education. We are going to use the rainy day fund. By the way, about half of the rainy day fund, that $900 million, a little more than half of that is an education rainy day fund, specifically for the rainiest of days, which is what we're seeing right now. But more importantly, I think we have to point out why we're always at the bottom of the barrel. It's not because we're not trying. In fact, we're trying harder than most states. There are 2 problems here. One, we have more kids per capita than anywhere else, and that's a good problem to have. It really is. The second, the biggest problem, though, is in most states, education funding comes from property taxes. Unfortunately, in the state of Utah, the federal government owns about 70% of our state. They pay what they call this payment in lieu of taxes. We call it pennies in lieu of trillions. It is irresponsible, the amount that the federal government provides for us for our school children. That has to change. We are making an effort. We lead the nation when it comes to effort, but these problems are holding us back, and we have to change those.
That's time. Would anyone like to respond? Mr. Hughes.
Yes, I would actually like our Spencer Cox to respond. One of the scariest things that I've seen in a long time as having been a lawmaker is this NEA endorsement, this National Education Labor Union. They give 97% of their dollars to Democrat candidates. The 3% of Republicans they give them to look mighty close to those Democrat candidates as well. This is not a labor organization that gives $75,000 to a candidate without expressed positions on issues. I would argue that when the NEA wants to rewrite and endorses rewriting American history and in the curriculum that forgets about the Pilgrims and our religious history and wants to refocus all attention on slavery, These are dangerous topics, and I've seen these and I've heard these in our town hall meetings across the state, that these are already issues, social issues, that seep their way into our public schools. What positions did you take, Spencer Cox, that got you $75,000 from the most powerful Democrat labor union of education in the country?
That's time.
What did you take? Quickly.
Sure. Well, I feel very fortunate to have more small dollar donors than any gubernatorial campaign in the history of the state. And I feel grateful to have the support of teachers in this state. We have incredible teachers. We have a teacher shortage. What I told teachers is that we need to solve that teacher shortage. It's amazing that a candidate that supports parental choice, a candidate who has said that we need to make it easier to get rid of bad teachers, has the support of teachers here in this state. I'm grateful to have their support. I'm grateful for the opportunity I have to represent teachers in charter schools, teachers in public schools, and making sure that education is the #1 priority in my campaign.
Quickly on the sales tax on food, I'm a candidate that's called for 0 sales tax on food. If it was wrong to tax food at 4.875 in the tax reform, wrong to tax it at 1.75, now might not be the right time, but we need to make that happen. On education, look, I have to call a spade a spade. These two opponents that I'm standing on the stage with, Cox and Hughes, were the ones that implemented Common Core in the state of Utah. Spencer Cox will stand here and tell you that he's for teachers, but he's fighting for more regulation, the very regulation that makes it miserable for teachers to teach. If we ever want to improve our public education system, it's not about the effort you put into it. You don't get anything for effort. You get something for results. That's the way it works in the world. We need to elect leaders that will stop talking about the effort that they're putting into something and that can actually implement strategies to create the results that taxpayers want, and that's more teacher pay and better outcomes for our students.
Mr. Huntsman.
Let me just say, again, there are a lot of words being spent on things that maybe in the years to come are not going to be material. I want a world-class education in this state. I want to rebrand Utah as crossroads of the world. We've forever been known as the crossroads of the West. And I think we have a huge opportunity, a moment in time, to seize some economic opportunities, bring them home to this state with a governor who knows how to get that done, with a bold vision to really get the lights on longer term in this state, to inure to the benefit of world-class education. Because you can't live in a place like China without realizing that they're doing a better job when it comes to educating the next generation of their kids. I don't want my kids and grandkids to fall behind at all. I want them to be the very best they can be, and we're going to have to work to make sure we can get there and that we can afford it.
Mr. Wright, Utah fought Obamacare. Utah fought the expansion of Medicaid. By and large, Utah lost. If you're elected governor, will you resume the fight? Do you think we ought to get out of Medicaid? Or are you going to fight other grants, social service grants from Washington?
Well, this is a perfect example, Rod, of two things. Number one, we need to be compassionate conservatives. We need to make sure that our citizens are well taken care of. But when it comes to health care, the challenge that we've seen is over-regulation. The maze and intricacies that they're imposing on doctors and hospitals and our healthcare systems is driving up our premiums. The very government that's pretending to save us in this healthcare battle of unaffordable healthcare is the very government that's causing it to be unaffordable in the first place. We need to make sure that we fight back and say we need free market, competitive environment in healthcare. And until we have that, and you have healthcare companies and insurance providers that are mandated by the federal government to cover all kinds of things, the regulation and the maze that they've created is the very problem that they're trying to solve. We've got to. Dick Armey once said, Rod, if you want to get out of the trap, you got to let go of the cheese. If we keep taking the federal government's money, they're going to keep intertwining themselves in our lives.
Will you fight Medicaid again?
I will fight for deregulating any entitlement program that causes things to be more expensive for our citizens.
Mr. Cobb.
Okay, next.
Mr. Hughes.
So let me just say, I get to respond to that, right? Or did I get my 1 minute?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me just say, Obamacare expansion, there is no federal funds, including what was just mentioned. The Common Core was not passed by us. You had a duly elected state school board looking during a Great Recession for race to the top funds from the Obama administration that signed up and checked the box to qualify for those federal funds. That's how this state got Common Core. Every time we take those federal funds, be it through health care and Obamacare expansion, Education, race to the top, Obama funds. And by the way, No Child Left Behind was the same problem for our state in terms of federal mandates and requirements, or the federal lands that have us pent in. It does not make this state stronger or more sovereign when we take federal funds. It does not end well. They have leverage over us as a state. It does not allow your locally elected legislature and governor to build a state budget that reflects the priorities of the people of Utah. Federal funds is a dead end. It sounds like a great promise, and we're going to have some shortfall. There's going to be a gravitational pull to it. You'll need a governor that's going to resist
Time, Mr. Hughes.
more
Cox
federal
and then
funds.
Huntsman.
Thank you. So, look, both of my colleagues are right on this. The dependence on federal money has become a growing issue and a growing concern in our state. And not only that, it was not the way that our system was designed. The states were supposed to be the laboratories of democracy. And if the federal government is going to get involved in these types of things, they should block grant the money to the states and let us design what works in our state. Because our state is very different than other states. There are things that we do better. There are things that we could do differently. There are things that we could do to save money. Anytime the federal government gets involved, you can count on two things. It's going to be very, very expensive, and it's not going to work the way it was intended. We can be the example to the nation in doing it differently.
Thank you. Mr. Huntsman, last response.
Yeah, let's talk about some specifics about how we can do it differently. So when you're governor of the greatest state in America, the 10th Amendment of the Constitution really strikes you as being the most powerful thing you've got, federalism. And during a period of deep dysfunction in Washington, I think the good news for us is we're going to have to solve more of our local problems more and more at a local level, which is fine, whether it's education, whether it's land-related issues, or whether it's health care. Two things that I want people to remember about healthcare that I think are going to be really important. Although we're seeing double-digit growth in healthcare, and nationally it's, the size of the GDP of France, $2.5 trillion. Transparency, like the work that John Dougal is doing to give consumers better understanding of what they're actually paying, is one of the most powerful things we can do, and I want to embrace that. Number two is expanding an insurance marketplace locally here, since we're in charge of insurance policy, that gives us more accessible, affordable, and portable insurance policies that we can use going forward, because the insurance market ain't working for people.
All right, Mr. Huntsman, thank you very much. We'll be right back after this break. Take two from 2 News. This is the podcast where we confront today's most pressing local and national issues.
But regardless where you come down on the issue, it's an unnecessary move.
We have racial bias in Utah.
This is where we examine all sides as a challenge to find common ground.
Disagreement by itself is not discourse.
And if people feel like signing the referendum, by all means, do it.
There are things that we can do, practical things that we could all agree on.
This is Take Two. Subscribe today.
KUTV2 plus Stir, the new free TV. Stir is powered by KUTV2, streaming 2 News live and on demand, and classic TV. Plus, binge watch for free. Stir delivers 100 plus extra channels with more than 5,000 hours of TV shows and movies. The biggest plus of all, it's all free. No subscription necessary. KUTV2 plus Stir. Download now. Stir, the new free TV.
Our time is running short. We would like to get a final statement from each of our candidates. We'll start with you, Mr. Cox.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the last time you're going to see us all on a stage together. It's been an interesting ride for sure. A year ago, my wife and I announced that we would be running for governor. And when we did that, we made a few promises, but one in particular was that we would run a different kind of campaign. We were committed to running a positive campaign. And I'm very proud to say that we've been able to do that. If I have to tear these fine gentlemen down to be your next governor, then I don't deserve to be your next governor. I want you to know why I'm running for governor of this great state. I love this place. Over the last 10 years, together, we built the best economy in our state's history and the best economy in the nation. And we're going to do it again. I'm running for governor because I believe in the goodness of our children, in the goodness of our teachers. I believe that together we can build the best education system in our country and in our state's history. And finally, I'm running for governor because politics has become so toxic and so divisive. And I believe that in Utah, there is a better way. I believe that we can bridge the divide between urban and rural. I believe that we can bridge the divide between our police and our minority communities. I believe that we can bridge the divide, believe it or not, between Republicans and Democrats. I believe that we can show the world that we can come together, that there is a better way, and Utah is the shining example for the rest of the country. Please vote for Cox Henderson.
Mr. Huntsman.
Rod and Heidi, thank you so much for the courtesy that you've shown to all of us, particularly me, in relative isolation, and I apologize for that. I'm honored to be running with Michelle Kaufusi, the mayor of Provo, and one of the most inspiring leaders I've seen in this state in a long time. She's historic. She's the first woman mayor of Provo. And I thought by uniting the U and the Y, we probably have solved half the state's problems just by doing that. And I'm honored to take this journey, but I want to say something that has nothing to do with politics because it's a lot more important. I just want to salute Lieutenant K.H. Allen, U.S. Air Force, who died in a plane crash off England. He leaves his family in Brigham City behind, including his wife, Hannah. This is a kind of service that we should salute and honor. That's what matters most. I don't need a title. I don't need a portrait hanging in the Capitol. I've got that. I just want to give everything I've got to making the state the very best it can be. We've got our work cut out for us. I humbly ask for your vote. Huntsman Kaufusi, days left. It'd be a great honor to serve you once again. Thank you so very much.
Mr. Huntsman, thank you. Mr. Hughes.
Thank you. We've had a great discussion tonight, and it is true. This is where you get to hear the candidates making their case. We've not had an open seat for governor for a long time. Let me just strike some differences in this discussion we've had. First off, I love Jon Huntsman. He's a dear friend of mine. You can hear the diplomatic tone in his answers. He is a pleaser, and that is what a good diplomat does. There are people, and I'm going to talk straight, that don't want to be pleased. You see it nationally. You see it in our state. There's an agenda out there. We need bold leadership that will push against that. When diplomacy and the talk in the summits are not going to happen, we have to stand strong. Second, I've heard Thomas Wright say, look, we had all this time. Nothing happened. Well, $400 million in tax cuts, fighting lawlessness in Operation Rio Grande in Salt Lake City, going and improving public education, including the funding of our schools, embracing parent choice and individualized education. If that's nothing, I don't think that we're paying attention. Lastly, with Lieutenant Governor Cox, I would just say this. This is a genuine worry. If you don't understand the $400+ million shortfall that the largest healthcare network in our state has seen, and that shortfall is medical delivery that would have otherwise occurred, so a healthcare crisis. If you don't understand the entitlement crisis that we have staring us in the face, if you want to hold education or anything in government harmless in a shortfall, you've got to take federal funds. We can't take those federal funds. And lastly, I'll tell you that this economy, it all begins and ends with you, the working people of the state of Utah. You have to get back to work. The Hughes-Iverson ticket will stick up for you, stick up for the little guy and gal. We would be honored to have your support.
Out of time. I'm sorry. Mr. Wright.
First, I want to thank my wife and kids for supporting me in this run. This is not about me. This is about the state of Utah. Utah is a fantastic place because of its citizens, not because of its government. Government certainly has a proper role, but our citizens work harder, they're smarter, they're self-reliant, they're self-sufficient, they're gritty, they're tough, and they make things happen. We need a governor that understands that it's the people that makes this state great, not the government. But we also need a governor who will help solve some of the problems that we've seen in government. Our affordable housing crisis, our lack of public education funding, northern Utah being left behind while the rest of the state has been thriving, rural Utah being left behind largely. We need a business person who has political experience to get in and make the hard decisions and have the hard conversations. I know in business, the most dangerous day is the day you have success. And the reason it's the most dangerous day is because everybody starts patting themselves on the back, telling everybody everything's going great. Cheerleading replaces leadership, and you get complacent. And we have seen complacency in our government. Look at the no-bid contracts. Look at the DMV scanning our faces and our kids' faces, giving our data away, selling our data. These are red flags. Government has a proper role. Thomas Wright will go in and make it right, always knowing that everyday success has to be fought for and it has to be won. It's not our gift. We have to go get it. Please vote for Thomas Wright for governor.
Thank you so much to all of our candidates for being here tonight. Thank you for being with us and watching. We hope this helps you make those tough decisions. If you've got that ballot on your counter, fill it out. Make sure that you get it in. Your vote counts. And a big thank you tonight to Salt Lake County letting us use the Black Box Theater here at the Eccles. Thanks again. We'll see you next on 2 News at 10 o'clock.
This debate has been underwritten and presented by Garbett Homes. Let's go green together.